things that we've talked about. So we find other things here that are of interest and of note to us. Verse 3, a blessing is pronounced to those who read and those who keep the words of this book. What's important with that is that we're not going to be expected to keep something and understand something that we can't understand. A lot of people shy away from studying this book, and that's a travesty, because this is a wonderful, wonderful book. Challenging, yes, it will be, but great, great study. So we have that. We have the recipients here in verse 4 to the 7 churches which are in Asia, and we'll deal with those more in detail in chapter 2 and chapter 3. And beginning over in verse 9 here, and for the rest of this first chapter, we have the details about the vision that John begins to see. Now, verse 19 is an important thing here. You might want to know it, because part of that, Jesus says to John in his vision, he says, write the things which you have seen. That's talking about the vision that he's already seeing. He has seen. That's number one. This is an outline of the book. And the things which are, now that's number 2. You can say that's chapters 2 and 3. That's the things that are present, the conditions that are present in those 7 churches of Asia. Now, why did he pick out those 7 churches of Asia? There are others there, Colossae and all of these others that are there. Why did they not get a letter? I think 7 churches here, 7 being an important word. Remember that? A word that represents perfection, completion, divinity in some cases, but those 7 churches are representative. Every church, Colossae and all of the others that were in existence at that time, yea, and those that are in existence today, us, Northport. I think those 7 churches are representative of all congregations, and all congregations really can find their place in one of those 7. You don't want to miss the study of chapter 2 and 3. I will say this, to give you a little heads up, I'm not going to study that in the ways that we have in the past. We're not going to spend 2 weeks on Ephesus and 2 weeks on Laodicea and so forth. But we are going to make some really good, it'll take us about 2 weeks to get through chapter 2 and 3 together. We'll study those 7. So chapters 2 and 3, you have the 7 churches there, and we'll deal with those later on. Now, beginning in chapter 4, we really see the flow of revelation begin to take shape. Because right here in chapter 4, it begins with, after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking to me. So John's first vision of this, of heaven, and all of the things that are to come. Remember, chapters 4 begin that section which the things which are to come. That's beginning to take place right here. And I'm going to remind you of this until you're sick of hearing it, if you're not already. It's going to be like a drama. We're going to look and see this whole thing. We'll read all of chapter 4 at one reading when we start. And then we'll start talking about kind of the overall flow of that, what it means. So John is beginning those things here in verse 1. And at the end of verse 1, he says, I'm going to show you things which must take place after this. I've got the word must circled there and put God is in control. The things that's going to happen, God knows it's happening, and God's got it laid out. Here are things that must take place, it says, after this. Now, if you want to tie that phrase after this back to chapter 1, verse 19, you can, because remember the third part there in verse 19 was the things which will take place after this. That's what John is beginning here in chapter 4, verse 1 to see. Now, we're introduced to the beginning of our of characters, some of which are going to be unusual to us, and we're going to have a tendency to zero in and say, what do those wings represent? What do those eyes represent? I'm going to caution us as we go not to do that. But you have 24 elders, 24 thrones, and 24 elders sitting on those thrones. This is what John sees in heaven as the curtain is pulled back, so to speak, and he gets a glimpse in here, and he sees the 24 thrones, and he sees the elders sitting on those 24 thrones, and then he sees these 4 living creatures with eyes in the front and in the back around the throne. Okay? What's important here is how chapter 4 ends. And that is all of these people, all of these characters that's described are all worshiping and honoring and glorifying God. See, verse 11 says, "You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power." So it's all about the attention given to Him. Hey, that's the reason we're here this morning. I have to remind myself sometimes that as much as I love being around you all and seeing you all on Sunday morning, the purpose that we're here for this morning is to do the same thing, bring honor and glory to Him. Okay, chapter 5. Now, in chapter 5, we're introduced to a little book or a scroll that is sealed with like wax, probably like wax seals or something. And how many of them are there? 7. And I've told you before, we're going to see that over and over and over as we go through the book. 7, that's an important number. And John sees this. This is all continuing of chapter 4. He's continuing to see this vision here. And so the one sitting on the throne, which is who? God is on the throne. That's who we in chapter 4 worship. And the one sitting on the throne is holding scrolls or a book that's sealed with 7 seals. And verse 2 here of chapter 5 says, "Who is worthy to open the seals?" Who's worthy to take those scrolls out of God's hand and open those seals? And John even weeps because nobody's worthy. Nobody can take the scrolls with one exception, and who is that? Jesus Christ. The Lamb steps forward, and so he gets the scrolls. And again, honor and glory to not only God, but to the Lamb as well. If you look over at verse 12, you see a verse there that says, "Worthy is the Lamb." We sing the song sometimes, "Worthy art thou." That's kind of where that comes from here. So the Lamb takes the scroll and he begins to open it. Now, chapter 6, we begin to open those scrolls one at a time. So you have the first seal. You have the first seal that opens that section of the book or whatever that's open. Then you have the second seal that's open. We'll talk about those in time to come. Then you got the third one. Then you got the fourth one. Now I want to stop here because in chapter 6, okay, so we have 7 seals. Then later in the book, we're going to have 7 trumpets. And then later in the book, we're going to have 7 bowls of wrath or vials of wrath. Some of the older versions call it 777. There is some sense that 7 is divided like this: 4, 2, and 1. You have 4 here that's very similar. And then you got 2 that's different. And then the 1 is going to be the last one, which when it opens, it's going to reveal the next set of 7 things. So you got these 6 seals, the 7 seals here, and the first 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, down through verse 8, very similar. But verse 9, the 5th seal and the 6th seal, ending chapter 6, are different. So you got 4 kind of similar, you got 2 that's different, and then you got 1 over here. So in chapter 6, you see 6 of those 7 seals. Now in chapter 7, there's something interesting about the book of Revelation. It's called, we referred to it as interludes. So you'll be talking about this thing here, and then all of a sudden it's like you say, time out. We've got to address this over here. Let's talk about something else. So you take an interlude in there, and I'm bad to do that. Y'all know that teaching class, I'm bad to chase rabbits and get off the subject. I know Wendell Winkler said one time, when he was teaching. He said, I'm going to drive a nail down right here. And y'all help me come back to it. And he'd go off over here, now what we're talking about? So go back over here. That's what the interlude is all about. So chapter 6 gives us 6 of these seals. And when they're open, it talks about the great devastation and destruction and horrible times that's coming on God's people. Well, what would be your tendency as a faithful Christian in the first century that received that letter and read those first 6 seals? What would be your tendency? What would you ask? I didn't set that up too well, so let me just answer it. Okay.
How can something good come from this?
How can something good come from this? And what I was thinking, tweak that a little bit, is, Lord, what's going to happen to me? When all this happens, what's going to happen to me? Or better yet, what's going to happen to my loved ones? See, I'm to the age in life right now, at 68 years old, it ain't about me. I'm concerned about the world that my grandkids are going to be growing up in. What's going to happen to them? And that's the question that is addressed here in chapter 7. And it's called the sealing of the saints, or the sealed of Israel. And we know that we're the spiritual Israel today, as were those faithful Christians then. So chapter 7 is an interlude, and it's helping to bring some comfort to those people who would be so afraid of what's going on. You see what we're doing here? We're developing this whole outline of Revelation to say it's not going to be so hard to understand when you see the overall view of it. So he's in an interlude here, and he said, address this over here before we continue with these things over here. Now you might want to look at verse 17 of chapter 7 and mark it, because again, if you're wanting to give comfort and assurance to those who are struggling, look what verse 17 says. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne, you got it? He's looking at this picture of the throne of heaven. The Lamb is in the midst of that. The Lamb has opened 6 of the 7 seals already, but it says, for the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will shepherd them and lead them to living fountains of water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Isn't that assuring? When you're dealing with all of these persecutions that may even take your life. But here's an assurance that the Lamb that's in the midst of that throne is going to take care of you. All right, so now, chapter 8. So the interlude's over, okay? The interlude's over, so we go back now and pick up. How many seals have we opened? 6. So now we're ready for that 7th seal. Remember I said 4, 2, 1. The 7th seal here is going to be an unveiling of the next set of prophecies. So chapter 8 says, when he opened the 7th seal, there it is, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. Interesting, we'll talk about that. That's one of those details. We don't want to get bogged down too much in that. But verse 2 says, and I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given, underline the word given there, and put, God is in control. Who's doing the giving to all this? God is. God's in control of all this chaos, all this devastation, all this stuff that's going on. God is the one that's in control. And I saw the 7 angels who stand, how many angels? 7. I saw the 7 angels who stand before God, and to them were given, how many trumpets? 7 trumpets. These 7, 7, 7. All right, so here we go. The seals, 7 seals, 4, 2, 1. The 7th seal here, when it opens, it unveils the next set of 7s, and that's 7 trumpets. And so the rest of chapter 8 and chapter 9 here, all are same thing with the seals. Now we're hearing trumpets. And so whether it's the seal or whether it's trumpets or whatever, it's announcing some something that's about to happen to the earth. And so we got the all the way through the 6th trumpet here in at the end of chapter 9. I'm not sure sure I'm not leaving something out I didn't say. So we got the seventh trumpet. At the end of chapter 9 is going to be the sixth trumpet. The seventh trumpet is not going to sound until over here at the end of chapter 11, I believe it is. So we've got another interlude. So you've got these six trumpets that's sounded, and then beginning in chapter 10 here, we've got another interlude. Now this interlude here begins with another angel coming down from heaven. We'll talk about it more in detail, but it's not Christ. It's another angel coming down from heaven, clothed with a cloud. And the description of how this angel is clothed makes some people believe that that's Christ. It's not. We'll talk about that time to come. And in his hand, he's got a little book. But where he's standing here is of importance. This angel is standing with 1 foot on the sea and 1 foot on the land. And so most people interpret that to mean that this is something that's the whole world, sea and land, together. So we've got this little book here that's introduced in chapter 10. Now, chapter 11, we see a couple of things here. That's the witnesses. There's 2 witnesses, and then we have the temple talked about. What is God's temple today? The church. 1 Corinthians 3:16. The temple of God today is not a physical edifice like it was under the old law. The temple today is identified in other parts of the scripture as being the church. So we're talking about the temple here. We're talking about these 2 witnesses. And then, beginning in verse 15, we have the 7th trumpet is sound. All right, so I want to pause here just long enough to say, chapter 11, I don't want to get too detailed with this, but remember us talking about the 3.5 years and the 1,260 days and the 42 months? That's all of that. We'll begin to see that in chapter 11, and we'll deal with it when we get over there at that time. But generally speaking, I told you that this last section, chapters 4 through 22, can be divided in 2. That's at the end of chapter 11. So chapters 4 through 11 give you one feel. Beginning in chapter 12 here, it's kind of like we changed gears a little bit. Still, John's still seeing this vision, but you'll see it as we get into a closer study of this, how that it takes on a little different turn there than we saw in the chapters 4 through 11. Chapter 12, we're introduced to the woman, the child, and the dragon. Now, the dragon is identified for us here in verse 9 of chapter 12. We will talk about it when we get there, but you might want to go ahead and mark that. So the great serpent, or the great dragon, was cast out. That serpent of old, when did we first see Satan as a serpent? Way back in creation, in Genesis chapter 3. That serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. So we don't have to wonder about this. That dragon that we encounter here in chapter 12 is Satan. All of this is about the enemies of God, the rebellion against God, led by the dragon, led by Satan. So all of these woes, all of this persecution, all of this devastation that's occurring here is on those enemies of God, especially chapters 4 through 11. Now, beginning in chapter 12, the turn we make here is we begin to see the reason behind that. And so a little different flavor there. Chapter 13. Chapter 13, we find 2 beasts. Now this I'm very excited about when we get to that point and can talk about those beasts. Chapter 4, verse 4 of that, so they worshiped the dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. So they worshiped Satan. But you got 2 beasts here. One is identified as the sea beast. I call them the sea beast and the land beast. The sea beast is discussed down through verse 10, and my Bible here says the beast from the earth. begins in verse 11. I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Who's the dragon? Satan. Evil, dark. He speaks like that, but his appearance is what? He appears like a lamb. Well, a lamb we associate with good. We associate that with religion. So this land beast here, when we get over there to chapter 13, will be a very important study for us. Chapter 14, chapter 13 is when we do that. Chapter 14 here, some more of the interlude continues, because here we have the lamb and the 144,000. I'll caution you, when we get there, don't take this literally. We're not talking about a literal 144,000. What does that represent? We'll talk about it then. But the important thing is just to remember that we're viewing this as it's kind of like me telling you, hey, have you ever seen this movie? Let me tell you about it. I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights of the movie and tell you about it. That's what we're doing here. If you look at all 22 chapters, the whole book of Revelation here, and just hit the highlights, you'll see what's being done in this great book here. So we'll talk about the Lamb and 144,000 there. Chapter 15 is the beginning. Kind of, we leave the interlude. That interlude's over. In chapter 15 here, we kind of return back to our 777. Okay, we got the seals, and we got the trumpets. Then we had quite a bit of an interlude here. We're kind of changing gears just a little bit. And then so chapter 15, we begin the last of the seven. Look at verse 1. Then I saw another sign in heaven. John is talking about this vision that he said, I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous. 7 angels having the 7 last plagues. Now you might want to circle the word last there, or note it in your notes, because this is it. You had those seals, then you had those trumpets, but now the last group. This is it. So it says the last 7 last plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. And then he begins, as we've noted before, he begins to unveil what each one of those bowls contain, or vials. Some of you with an older version, does anybody have 7 vials? Nobody? Everybody's got 7 bowls?
First one,
Pardon me?
I was writing, I wasn't finished.
Okay. Let's do verse 2 of chapter 16.
Or 16.
So the first went and poured out his. You said I knew it did. I knew the old King James said vials. Okay. So anyway, vials, bowls. So these are the 7 last plagues that's been introduced here, and out comes these prophecies here associated with each one. The first bowl is poured out, then the second bowl is poured out, and the third bowl, and so forth. So let me see what else I want to say there. All right, so that brings us down to 17. You do get all 7 of those bowls in chapter 16. Vials and bowls, whatever. You get all 7 of them there in chapter 16. Chapter 17. All right, so now we begin really. Those were the last plagues. The bowls were. So chapter 17. Now we begin our march toward the culmination of all of it. And we're introduced to a scarlet woman and the scarlet beast. Now, what do we associate scarlet with? What?
I was thinking blood.
Red.
Well, yeah. Scarlet letter.
Yeah.
Not good. Let's put it that way. Not good. So we've got this verse 1 of chapter 17. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and talked with me, saying, Come, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters. Well, if you want to go ahead and cross-reference that, go down to the last verse of chapter 17, and it tells you who that is. Who is that woman? Is this a Jezebel? Is this a certain woman that's to appear? No. The woman whom you saw is that great city. Now, this is written to those first century Christians, and so the power that is at that particular time was the Roman Empire, that great city, Rome, which is inflicting a lot of this. Don't you remember? That's the reason we had the discussion about those emperors and forcing the emperor worship. So we've got here that great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. But now final judgment is about to happen to all of them. All right, chapter 18, as this woman, this great city, as this final destruction over this evil power happens, chapter 18 gives you the world's view of that. The world mourns because of what's happened to this great power and this great nation and this great city and this great government that the world basically was worshiping. Oh my! How many of y'all have ever had the thought about what's going to happen when the U.S. falls? Mm-hmm. What's going to happen to America when the U.S. collapses? I got news for you. If the world lasts long enough and Jesus doesn't come back before that time, it's going to happen. That'll happen at some point. But we don't need to take the attitude that we find here in verse 18, or chapter 18, and that is, woe is me. Remember those promises of assurance that we're going to be taken care of. We're going to be all right. You know, I want to live a long time. Teresa doesn't. No, let me finish. She doesn't want to live 100. I do. I want to live a long time. She said, I want to live as long as I can be productive, take care of myself. No, okay. I'm off on one of my tangents. Sorry. But you know what? To the faithful Christian, the best is yet to come. The best day of my life would be the day that I give up this earthly tent and go on to be with the Lord. If you're a faithful Christian, we got to have that attitude. We got to believe that. So, chapter 18 is the world mourns when that city and that evil force falls. But chapter 19, we begin to see what's happening in heaven at that same time. Heaven rejoices because good is winning out. Don't you remember that we marked verse 14 of chapter 17 as the key verse in the book when it says these enemies, these will make war with the Lamb and the Lamb will overcome them. Chapter 17 verse 14, that's the key. We didn't know anything else about all of what does this sign mean? Well, I don't know. And it doesn't matter. Because if it's evil, if it's an enemy of God, the Lamb's going to overcome them. And the end of all of it to the faithful Christian we'll be better off when all of that is behind us. And so that'll carry us down through chapter 19. We're about out of time, so I'm going to do it quickly. Chapter 20 is one of the most misused and misinterpreted chapters in the entire Bible, because that's the chapter where we run into the 1,000 years, and basically the idea of premillennialism is built on a lot of the stuff that we find in chapter 20. So at the risk of running out of time, we're just going to leave it at that, other than to say this. If you wanted to label chapter 20, look at verse 10. No, stay with me 2 minutes. In verse 10 of chapter 20, it says, the devil, Satan, the dragon, the devil who had deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. See, that's the end. That's the end. That's the final summation or the final destination of all evil. And he's the last one. Remember, it's talking about the land beast and the sea beast. We'll see them cast in there one at a time. But here in verse 10, we finally see the devil. Now, in chapters 21 and 22, we have really all of the evil has been taken care of, and now it's time for the description of what our eternal abode will be like. The New Jerusalem, heaven, and that's all described in there. And I'll just leave you with this one thought. And next week, now we're going to jump into chapter 1, and we're going to begin our march through. I told you I'd like to do a chapter a week. We'll see how that goes. But right now, let me just say this to you. Chapter 22, if you hadn't already got it label chapter 22 thusly. Paradise restored. All the way back in Genesis 3, we have paradise vacated. And then the whole Bible is about all of that evil. But then we get rid of all that evil there in chapter 19 and 20, and in chapter 22, we find paradise restored. What a thrilling expectation we as faithful Christians have to be around the tree of life, to be in a place that's just like Genesis 1 and 2. Perfection, everything, all our needs met. And that's what Revelation 22 promises awaits those who are faithful. Aren't you excited about getting into it next week? Hope to see you here. I am. I'm going to give you a chapter outline. That's the reason I put those in the 3-red binder.
Oh, good. So late. I lost my earring. Oh, yeah.